Yeah.
I still feel congested and kind of half off. So,
Mm.
2 weeks of this, I'm ready for it to just be gone.
Yeah. Yeah. No kidding.
So I
Yep.
don't know.
Yep.
Um,
I've got my fingers crossed because I'm getting on a plane on Monday after class to go to Woodland for my parents' 90th birthday party week.
oh, they both were born in the same week?
Well, my mom was born on the 20th of February, and my dad was born on the 4th of March. So it's not quite within a week,
Same
but
fortnight.
yeah,
Yeah.
we're having the party sort of at the midpoint on the 28th or so. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
And
if they call you for an in-person interview, you're all set.
actually, I'm going to interview at Woodland.
Oh, you are.
I sort of, yeah, jammed my foot in the door. I applied and then I emailed the dean of arts and letters or whatever it is, humanities are called there. And I said, hey, I'm going to be in town, my,
Do you want to talk?
you
Yeah,
want to talk?
nice.
And she said, Joe, oh, yeah, sure, great. So I'm going to talk to her on Tuesday.
Well,
And she
that's
said,
very promising.
yeah, she
If
said,
nothing else, good connections and probably
right.
interesting conversation, right?
Right, yeah, and they advertised both a 10-year track position, whatever that would entail at a community college in the Cal State system, and also a they advertised for the adjunct pool. So, she actually responded to me first and said, "Well, which one of them is it that you're interested in?" I said, "Well, in the long run, a permanent one, but I'd be, perfectly happy to, get my,
Start and test
you
the
know,
waters.
right to kind of get my foot in the door with a temporary thing because
At
I mean,
least
yeah,
it gets you away from that war zone all the way up north called
Minneapolis.
Greenland.
Yeah, yeah,
Well,
I mean,
there's that fake war in Minneapolis.
yeah,
The downside, of course, is you've got to watch out for the wildfires. So,
yeah. Not so much in Woodland, I think, but
and
I've only
and of
I
course,
That's what I would
we'll
have
turn
said
to
a year
Chris.
ago too, Dan. So be careful.
yes, right. I suppose, yeah, yeah. And actually, I'll only be. I checked the. I didn't try to map to close to you, but I checked the distance from Woodland to LA, and it's like 375 miles. So it's like, oh, I could come down to yeah, to visit you and see the Huntington and all the
Well,
California stuff.
as we all know, when you go in for this interview, it's all about the connections and closeness and
Hmm.
network
Yeah,
space now. So
it's all about the network. Yeah, yeah. It's funny too because I what I can tell her when I see her, which I didn't know when I first wrote to her, was that my dad actually his photo is in the cornerstone of the new campus because he was one of the faculty who was working there when they moved from their temporary to their permanent campus in Woodland. So in
oh,
1990 or whatever. So I can say, I got a family connection here.
Careful with the legacy card.
Yeah, right,
yeah.
right. I think they,
How did he leave? I guess is the question.
right. Yeah.
I,
well,
I I try to pull that when I go down to UC Irvine. It's never got me anything.
I got the reverse sort of networking. Um, Back when I was about 4 or 5, the UK was building out its TV coverage
Hmm.
to convert from black and white to colour.
Mm.
And we did that by going from 405 lines to 625 lines.
Mm.
And Dad was building the transmission equipment into the aerial. He wasn't building the ironwork for the pylon aerial, but was doing the engineering gubbins at the bottom. And the last job in the UK that I did before I came here was I converted the BBC to digital. It didn't get me any more money, but it got me.
Hmm.
But it was nice. It was nice to round out the job.
Mm.
As in, Kilroy was here. Going back
Right.
to the previous book with Kilroy, it
Absolutely.
was
Yeah.
Bushell was here,
Right.
twice over.
Right. So you ushered in analog color, and you also ushered it out. Your family.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh,
So
okay.
we ushered in analog color,
Yeah.
and there wasn't really much major after that, except they went digital radio
hmm
10+ years before
Yeah.
they did the TV.
I remember I was
So as not to delay the access to the book. Um, the first chapter or two, I'm going, how come I'm reading my biography written by some Chilean bloke?
yeah. Yep. I don't have a physical copy, but I do have the audiobook and the Kindle.
Yeah, I
you
got
can go
the
too.
I ordered a physical copy the day we talked about it, literally the minute,
Oh wow.
because I actually had meant to order it the day before when it was supposedly released in the US.
hmm
It still hasn't shown up. And my guess is when it does show up in a few days, it's going to be an Alan Lane published copy
Sure.
and not a Penguin US copy,
Right.
which I find, you know, phenomenally entertaining. So I finally this week I've succumbed and picked up the audio book copy just to like get started.
hmm
And I was like, I'm not gonna spend the extra money on a Kindle copy too,
Right. Yeah.
in hopes that the physical copy shows up sooner than later. But
Yep.
How is the audio copy? I mean, I'm making good headway in the ebook, so I don't think I'll need it. But
the audio's
It was
it's
easy.
okay.
is it a good reader? Or
It's a reasonable reader, I think. It's some of that there are pieces for hearing it. I really want to see it and read it and review it and have something to
Yeah.
write on while I'm
yeah, there's
mulling through. I feel like I need to read it again. Definitely, the audiobook just it's not enough.
when he
Yeah.
starts talking about
Yeah.
he starts talking about, and this is past where we are, but when he starts talking about the geometries of knowledge and comparing it to chords and tones, I think the audiobook is going to suffer.
That'll be
Yeah.
that'll be interesting to listen to. Oh, it went fast. What I will say about
Yeah, it's very brisk.
I about the first half plus. I guess I went somewhat into part three or whatever as I was listening, which I didn't notice until I was actually looking at the ebook. I thought, oh, well, that's too far. But yeah, it was. I thought it went fast, and I did feel like the stuff that I wanted, that as I was listening, I thought, ooh, I want to make sure that I notice that and I note that when I'm kind of going through.
Well,
I did find.
I was disappointed in the sense of my ebook copy, even in like chapter 1 and 2.
Hmm.
There's the indicators about a footnote, so there's FN number, and some of them are blank.
Oh, I didn't check any yet.
Now,
I did notice they changed the numbering along the way.
They go back and forth.
Yeah.
It seems like sometimes they're FN X Y, and then sometimes they're just
numbers.
XY. And
oh,
I think, at least in my copy.
I mean, I have a quick question about that. So I read the first 2 sections this morning on the web. I did, instead of trying to download it putting it on my phone, it's just bigger format on the web. You still deal.
Yeah.
And yeah, I found it really disruptive, and maybe it's different in how it handles different in the Kindle app or whatever instead of a browser. I wanted to go look at. I tried looking at a couple of footnotes, and it jumped me straight to the footnote. Hooray! But I didn't have an easy way to get back.
Mm.
I had to
You have to. So in the Kindle, you can click the footnote bullet in the footnotes, and it'll jump back to the actual location.
Yeah, well, I'm reading.
Okay.
I'm reading
But
it
also,
via.
but I've noticed also in the Kindle app, you can now, at least in my Kindle app, you can now long click
Yep.
Okay.
footnote, and it'll pop up a window, which I hadn't. Is that new? I don't know. Anyway,
I think it is new. Yeah, I think it's
Okay.
just
I
just noticed it for the first time.
I was going to
I
say,
will
now-
test it
I'm
on my
using,
phone. Yeah, because I was like, I already got that. Like immediately read now. Like, oh, great, my full nice big screen and stuff.
no, yeah, big screen better, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Right.
But yeah, the interface for the because there's a ton of footnotes, and I was like,
Yes.
I want to look at these. And if I had the physical copy, yeah, I would be
Yes.
like, doing the typical, all right, my
I mean,
thought where I am and back to there kind of thing.
Yeah.
A lot.
yeah, yeah, from per the page count, I think footnotes are about a third of the volume.
Mhm. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
nice. I mean,
Yep.
for this group.
well, actually, of course, oddly enough, as a mistake by Dan, that is probably the worst one I've ever heard. The footnotes are at the bottom of the printed page, right?
Well, are they foot or end? We don't know.
And
But
well,
they're
they
tagged as
actually they
FN.
call
They're tagged as FN. So,
FN. They
Because
call them
this is-
FN, but they are endnotes. Yeah. So who
well,
knows?
so when
What-
Chris gets his physical copy,
Yes, we'll find out.
Well, on the copy I've got notes and footnotes. So
But
the footnotes come
it'll
up
be at the end of the page.
as
yes.
a bubble in the text. But
Oh,
the
that's nice.
notes
That's what I want.
take me to the end.
What kills me is we're now 20 years into ebooks, and this is still an issue and a question and a problem. Like,
right.
how is this? How are these domain experts in electronics and digital distribution of books?
So-
How is this not a solved issue? In the 6th month.
Mhm. Yeah.
So a friend of mine, just to come back to a book of the moment, not for this group, Infinite Jest, initially read it, I believe, as audiobook. And if you've read Infinite Jest, a significant portion of the text is endnote, footnote,
Mm.
only to discover, oh my God, there's all this other matter. And so apparently if you buy the audiobook, you get a PDF download.
Oh.
So, but this was also 10 years ago. So yes, Chris, not a solved problem. And there are many smart people who have probably proposed good solutions that, of course, is, then you have to go back and remark all the text that you've done, right?
100 years
Yeah,
from
but
now,
in terms of solving problem, how is it that it took so long to get to USB-C? As in, you don't need to worry about which way up you put it in, compared from a USB-A.
Very true.
And what happened to what happened to USB-B?
Well, yeah.
And
That's my
Yeah,
monkey.
so the computer industry clearly, although oddly enough, probably the best in its time period, where the context meant it was very good. By far, the best torpedo that the Americans ever did was called a mine, just to make sure that the bad guys didn't realise that their submarines were going down the tube based on a torpedo chasing the submarine, not a mine. So
How long did that last?
and that was just before you joined World War II proper. You were starting to evolve, and there was a political reason for it as well. Torpedoes had a procurement process through a very long military bureaucratic process. But apparently, because mines are so simple,
Because
they had a completely different process.
Sure. Yeah, they're
So you went from request to the first kill of a submarine in like 17 months versus what the actual torpedoes that were fired by ships and submarines were for almost all of the World War II pretty crap from the American side. And they were still trying to figure out the bugs because the committee was working so slow.
Well, I mean, we should give the British credit, right? They did a lot of cool tech stuff in the first, before the U.S. entered the war. I mean, they did radar. Cry eye, so So that, credit where it's due.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing about this whole idea that I thought he went some really interesting places, and I especially liked the Arkwright stuff, and I can use that because I usually don't talk about Arkwright, although I do talk about Newland Ark and Robert Owen. So that'll be a nice little addition to kind of the history that I do. But this introductory stuff when he's talking about the he's talking about this idea of rival inputs, and knowledge being generally non-rival. But then he goes into the analogy of the hammer, right? And you can only use hammers one at a time. And if you have 10 hammers, you've got 10 people working on something. And then he sort of extends that metaphor onto the nail gun thing. And I thought the thing that he was sort of, I mean, yes, okay, that becomes intellectual property / capital, right? And so you've got sort of the de-skilling to some extent of that process as it's being sped up. But there were those two things there, and I thought that he didn't, especially in that early part, really kind of distinguish that well between when we're talking about skills becoming capital, equipment, or becoming part of the intellectual property, and when instead we're talking about crushing the time horizon, right, and making things happen quicker, right? Because that's the other way that you get more output, right? Is you run 3 shifts instead of 1 or 2, and and so that the hammer, the 10 hammers get to be used 3 times as much.
Or you do your Henry Ford production line,
Mhm.
and you have one guy with a hammer, and that's all he's doing is one guy with a hammer.
Right.
But then the issue with that is if the one guy with the hammer doesn't know what's before or after him or what the overall process looks like,
Mhm.
if he's embedded in the system and he may not be able to see or be empowered to help improve the bigger
Right.
part of the system
Right.
because he sees or knows what's going on. Presumably chats with people in the lunch line and,
Mhm.
while he's clocking in or out, and that may move that
Yeah.
data along and improve it. But
Mhm.
there are, I don't know, there are like, he's taking economics data, roughly from the 90s and trying to expand on it and delve one level deeper. And for, hundreds of years, it's it's been, I think, a huge missing piece of the economic puzzle that we don't talk about information. We only talk about labor and we talk about capital.
Right.
And we generally haven't talked about information or knowledge. And here is his background is primarily physics first,
Mhm.
and then information theory
Mhm.
second, and then he's slowly moved into economics, network theory, complexity theory over the last 20 years.
Mhm.
Um, it's what's interesting is that as an theoretical information theorist, I have been aware of Cesar Hidalgo for 20 plus years now.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
almost since the time he was in graduate school, really, he's been on my radar,
Mhm.
um, which is a long time.
Yeah.
Um, but it's fascinating to see him kind of start to differentiate some of this information and knowledge piece.
Mhm.
But it also means the edges are going to be a little murky.
Yeah.
And, what I wouldn't love to see, like some of these pieces get much more reified and,
Mhm.
ramified along the way.
Yeah. And I was wondering if maybe because maybe he wasn't really focusing on this in the early chapter because where he wants to go is more, and especially, if we get to this, this place that it's going to be difficult for me to listen to and I'm going to have to read, I'm looking forward to that, okay, so that's what he's really focused on. And maybe he's not giving, maybe he's kind of just painting,
But
painting
it's
this,
also,
this
He's
intro
building
stuff too quickly.
blocks. I
Yeah.
think the first half is building blocks.
Yeah. Okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and it's interesting too to take, we had the history book in between, but it's interesting to take that idea of knowledge from Pinker
Hmm.
and contrast it with this. But it's also very, and I'm kind of sad Mark's not here with us because some of the early chapters here on learning in particular,
Hmm.
and some of the, I've pulled out a half a dozen papers and skimmed through a few of them already
Hmm.
on, organizational learning
Yeah.
and how, not only how does an individual learn, but how does an organization
Hmm.
as a thing learn?
Yeah.
And comparing that especially with some of the, the bigger companies I've worked for and how well they're good at doing those types of things, or even watching how, because I've been embedded in Los Angeles and Hollywood land for 20 plus years, how does, and Hollywood seems to be kind of slowly disintegrating because everybody has a camera in their pocket and there's a lot you can do to make things in competition with streaming and YouTube and, all of the things.
Yep.
A lot of physical production has left Southern California. And even though some of it, moves to New York, which has been a perennial place, or parts of Canada, which have their own like mini ecosystems with all the moving parts,
Hmm.
production is moving to Louisiana, it's moving to Georgia, and as those areas grow in knowledge of how these things are done, it makes it a lot harder for Hollywood without massive tax breaks or financial incentives
Hmm.
to suck it all back.
Yeah.
And I'm waiting for the day that a major studio either leaves Los Angeles or sprouts up in some other place that's not Los Angeles as
Hmm.
its, home hub.
Yeah.
And it's, within the next
Am-
decade, I presume that will happen.
Isn't
But is it
isn't
just the
isn't there movement
production?
in Atlanta like that? Sorry, Will.
I very quickly. Is it just the technical production people, the guy who knows how to run that kind of big camera, who knows to, that versus, I mean, you still have the talent. And obviously, being a good editor is a talent. Being a good photographer is a talent. But sort of or and again, even back to the network effects of uh, directors, directors and the like bouncing ideas off of one another because they happen to both live in Brentwood or whatever. I don't
Yeah.
know.
Well,
I
that's
mean,
that's what I was wondering about, sort of the Chili Davis, kind of walking around, seeing people talking, kind
Yeah. Well, that's the thing is the physical production stuff, the knowledge to move that to other cities has happened, and that's a lot easier.
of. Hmm.
But it's a lot harder on the creative side, which is part of why everything on the creative side is so heavily based in Los Angeles. All the studio execs, all the creative execs are here. So if you're an agent and you set your clients up a writer to go pitch
Hmm.
within a 50-mile radius,
Yeah.
or even 20 or 30-mile radius, depending on how far the writer lives, like they can come into town,
Right.
pitch stuff for a week, and then leave and go back to, if you're, let's say you're Robert Duvall, you go back to your farm in Virginia,
Hmm.
or if you're, um, Gene Hackman, I think, had a place in Arizona, maybe
Hmm.
where he died, and he had been there for decades. But it's much much harder, and it's only happened one or two times for people who have tons of money. That if you're George Lucas or Francis Ford Coppola, and you're a mini cottage industry under yourself, can you leave LA
Right.
and go to San Francisco?
Right.
And because they both knew each other and they both wanted to go up and moved up together,
Hmm.
Coppola and Lucas both did that.
Yeah.
But some of their team around them also went too. So Walter Murch, the film editor, lived up in Northern California as well.
Mm.
And that because they were so big, they were able to draw things up with them.
Right.
But that's super hard, and you still gotta, come back to LA to do the pitches and get the money.
Right.
But you can physically make all the stuff in your backyard wherever you happen to be
Hmm.
if you happen to be big enough and have enough money to do
Yeah.
it. But it's a lot more expensive.
Yeah.
So
So,
It's
yeah, so I was fascinated too by that. You know, I wasn't really that aware of the Herbert Simon James March organization book. So that was, you know, that I kind of paused at that point. And this idea about, you know, sort of the analogy to machine learning or to, you know, to language models, right? Where, you know, machines learn by rewiring networks and are constrained by attention, I guess is an analogy and a comparison. And that and I found that kind of interesting. This idea of organizational knowledge can't be reduced to the knowledge of the individuals, and that there's something there, that the sum is somehow greater than the parts and is based partially on these interactions. And that would seem to be kind of a sort of a fuzzy and hard to quantify sort of a
well,
thing.
even for us as individual, let's say, note takers, when we think, and everybody, all of this space around this type of knowledge is people primarily trying to apply it to their own lives for increased productivity.
Mhm.
So, how do you as an individual become more productive? And it's one of the kind of underlying things is you were offloading a lot of it to a second brain,
Mhm.
for those who want to call it that, or, to your Zettelkasten or notebook or whatever. And then you get the creativity out of that, of all your ideas. Essentially, your notebook or your card index is, the company cafeteria, and
Mhm.
all your ideas can kind of mix together to come up with something new, which is where those new ideas and that productivity comes out.
Mhm.
But the other question is, how can you use what's in this book to kind of supercharge those areas of productivity
Mhm.
individually for yourself, which is one kind of area, but then, or how do you come together in a group like the 5 or 6 or 10 of us, depending on which book we're reading,
Mhm.
and admix those ideas
Yeah.
to either be better at reading a book or doing something in your life, because we're
Well,
not, we don't have there's not a product we're all producing every week
Right.
necessarily, but in some sense there kind of is.
Mhm.
And it's the, how do we do that? What's going on? How
Yeah.
can we take these ideas and inject them in to some bigger
Right. Right. Well,
piece?
and it does seem like, you know, when he's talking about, and actually one of the things that I didn't know I was going to like so much when I got to the ebook was the diagrams. I'm really thinking he's, you know, so far in this first half of the book, I think he's using these diagrams really well. And I'm
yeah, well,
actually, go ahead.
there's been a couple of mentions where I can't remember who said it, Chris or Dan, talks about talking to the other workers who don't necessarily use the hammer,
Yeah.
but in the lineup for the canteen. And in reading this, I'd already thought of, oh yeah, that's like the story from In Search of Excellence, where one of the C-suite type people said his biggest decision on a particular year was to get rid of all the four people tables in the canteen and put in benches.
Mm.
Because the same four people, when there's a four-person table, they sit on the same table with the same four people. So there's not a lot of this cross-feed fertilization.
Mhm.
Whereas with benches, almost everybody in twos and threes and fours are next to people they weren't next to yesterday,
Mm.
and they're not with the same people tomorrow.
Mhm.
And then, of course, Tom Peters pipes up and said, quite a bit of the stories we told in The Search of Excellence we made up. They're not actual real stories. So I've never bothered to try and find out whether they confessed to which stories were real, which ones weren't.
Mm.
But I can think of it in terms of my last main job, the staff canteen was tables drawn together. So there weren't any bench tables, but there was materially that's how it was laid out.
Mm-hmm.
Yet, being senior staff, I was allowed to go to all the public-facing restaurant
Mm-hmm.
where it's all 2 people and 4 people tables. That you would pull 1 or 2 of those together if you were in a big family group.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the story that they told then was very true in the sense of when we decided we're all going to go to a public-facing restaurant,
Yeah.
it would be the same or it'd be the same from 8.
Right.
You know, there's not every time would be the same 4. There would be a core of 3, and there'd be one person who hasn't been to lunch with you for a week,
Mm-hmm.
type thing.
Yeah.
And it also reminded me of, as I said right in the beginning, a bit of my biography. Way back when people used to ask, "What do I do?" And to explain it, I always talked about the life of a building and the bit that I had dealt with at one employment level or another as being the school years.
Mm-hmm.
So early design, detailed design in British terms would be infants and junior. So, 5 to 8, 8 to 11.
Mm-hmm.
Then while it's on site, and then the exams at the end to get your graduation from high school equivalent was building on site, being tested and commissioned and handed over. Then I moved into facilities, and I'd never really got the question since.
Mm.
And of course, facility type people are often the trigger to some clients to say, "Oh, by the way, if your growth continues as it is, we're going to run out of space in the building, or you need to hire a new one." So you're at the conception of the project rather than a consultant designer or a contractor saying, "Oh, I'd like to build you an office," because nobody does that. The client comes up and says, "Hey, I need a new office, or I need a new factory, or I need a new hospital."
Mm-hmm.
Or I just as easily, I need to replace an existing one or upgrade an existing one.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, an awful lot of what he's talking about in the intro, particularly, and chapter 1, all supported that, as in, what knowledge do you need to be able to make that decision?
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And if you're in the business of making widgets, you don't really know about the business of making a building to make widgets.
Right. Well, okay. So which brings that actually brings me back to the diagram thing, right? So he's kind of diagramming this thing, and he's got the one, kind of with the straight, up and to the right gray line of a Moore type law, and then he's got these little curves under it of what he calls technological generations, and then in parentheses Thurston Wright learning curves, and so that seems to be sort of a kind of a straightforward sequential thing. Okay, we have a process at this scale, and then we improve the lithography or whatever, we get a new process at a new scale. But what I'm curious about, and it kind of goes to what you're talking about the different, it's not always the same people going to lunch each week, and what Chris was talking about sort of these adjacent developments, and he kind of waves at it a couple times and says, well, okay, what about the person who's doing, when he's talking about the Liberty boats, they say, well, what about the person who's building this other thing, does their learning or does their institutional knowledge or does what they do somehow apply, and so I'm curious about whether or not you can have these sort of overlapping curves of not just straight generation of technology, but kind of adjacent areas of knowledge that go to supporting a curve like this. Go ahead, Will.
Yeah, and there's something, I mean, and then again, also back to what Tim was talking about with the proximity, and it's something that really comes up in the book about, again, that proximity. I mean, I notice, I certainly have, again, since the pandemic, we went all virtual, right? At my shop, and it's something I've definitely noticed is, in the previous 9 years before that, where I'm at, an awful lot of my utility and my work style was I would just go walk into other departments
Mm-hmm.
and talk to people and say, okay, to find out what the heck they really needed, where were the bottlenecks, with
Right.
people who I have no interaction, who are,
Right.
I want something I did. And, but then, I was a connector. And that is, and that was something much more facilitative, by actually being, in 2 floors in a Manhattan skyscraper. But again, this wasn't. Yeah, I would just actively go, and look up somebody in another place, and just say, I've got something vaguely related to what you do, I could that be done better? How do we make that kind of stuff work? Because an awful lot of what I do is systems integration, right? So I'm finding new systems to integrate. But my specific situation, that of like, oh, we're going virtual. That gets us to this thesis of the book, or one of the major theses of the book of, yeah, people are rubbing off of each other, and what sort of impact to the much greater amount of virtualization is that having on, cross contamination, cross pollination of ideas in the in the last few years. I mean, I know, yes, there's reason, people are going back into the office, but some, but yeah, it's just sort of interesting to see how that virtualization, what effects that having. So
Yeah, the physical transfer of knowledge embodied in a human moving from
yeah,
whatever, the Midlands to or the North, I guess, to the Northeast is very different than me interacting with a colleague in London virtually.
Mm-hmm.
Or is it? And that's where I'm that's one of the things that the
And
first section of the book had me thinking
well,
about.
you have to initiate that Zoom call with your colleague in London.
But I had to get on a ship. I had to get
Yeah.
on a ship. I had to write the letter. I had to
Yeah.
collect the letters of introduction, whatever, right?
Well,
there's
once you
parallels.
did the ship thing, though, the next thing
You're
you
pretty
know,
committed.
you're in Boston, Chicago, or wherever, and you're still going out to coffee someplace, and there's somebody, somebody you
Mhm.
vaguely noticed from.
Very true. Yeah.
Well, and he does talk about that with respect to Samuel Slater, right? He says, well, okay, Samuel Slater made the ship journey once, right? But then where did he go when he arrived in Pawtucket? And I actually lived in Rehoboth, and I didn't realize the second mill was in Rehoboth, so I'm going to go back there and find it. But in any case, Rehoboth is also the place where King Philip's War began and ended. But it's interesting that this idea of you don't, and I guess maybe I'm relating it to my experience this week, that you don't really know until you know. I have just actually kind of concluded pretty much finally this week that I will not be teaching in person at all in the fall, unless I happen to get this job in Woodland, and that does have an in-person component. But up until that happened, I don't know, that was less than 48 hours ago. I was looking at, I'll still be teaching at 3 different institutions within the system, but not at the one that I sort of had that's in St. Paul, that is a mile and a quarter away, down Summit Avenue, that I would walk to, and I imagined was sort of my home campus, and so I'm having this. And so it's like my brain has exploded, and I'm now all of a sudden I'm thinking, well, if I can be completely virtual, then I can teach these courses at, the place in the western suburbs, and the place up north, and the place in the southwest, corner of the state, from Woodland, and that is, I think, and why would I want to connect that with this idea of where, of what big things happen, and then where does, and the whole Samuel Slater story interested me
So
a
here's
lot.
a good question for you then, Dan. Do you feel like you've been relegated to teaching in remote South America at Yache by being virtual? Or do you still feel as connected both with your students and other, like, you mentioned collegiality
Mhm.
within a college or a university. Like, do you still feel as connected as if you were on a campus teaching physically,
No,
in a major hub? Like, and not that Bemidji is a major hub,
right. But there
but
was a
at
guy
least
next door.
concentrated on a
Yeah,
campus,
yeah.
you've got other researchers around you you can chat with and connect with who are seeing and doing other things. But if you're doing it all virtually, you don't even have the collegiality of the faculty around you
Well, it's
on a
also
daily
if you
basis.
have an institution that sort of has that baked in and sort of supports that, then you have it. And if you don't, then I mean, I guess the flip side for me and the upside for me is that I'm going to be able to go to, when I'm driving over spring break, I'm driving to Pittsburgh. Going on my first road trip to see my daughter and her baby before she has her second baby. And I'm going to stop at Madison, which I've never really been to, and I've never been to the university and seen the archives there. And then I'm going to stop in the peppermint country that I researched in southwestern Michigan and do a little bit more and do some video making and kind of a little bit more work there. And so I'm thinking, oh, these opportunities were always open to me, right? There was nothing saying that I couldn't do that, right? But now I'm also thinking, well, shit, I have a car. I can drive. I don't have to be anywhere. I can drive out to Massachusetts and spend a week in Worcester at the American Antiquarian Society and just mess around to my heart's content. And so uh, I don't have an institution that prevents me from doing it. I also don't have an institution that supports me from, or that makes
Yeah.
that obvious. So I have to
Oddly,
do it myself.
oddly enough, in that context, thinking about it, there was 3 years solid within one design group, although we moved about a little bit because of office sharing.
Hmm.
And then normally 4 years physically at university in one university. I didn't take it. I didn't go for a year to some other university, which was an option.
Hmm.
And then I went back to the same company, but a regional office out in Bristol from London. And I was told that was a mistake because I would never work in London where all the big stuff gets done or where all the juicy stuff, etc.
Hmm.
Yet, oddly enough, about a fifth of my work when I was in Bristol was in London. I then changed from a 4,500 plus people company to a 12-person company based in Bath, and half of my work was in London.
Hmm.
And the only thing that I really missed when I went to the little company was we had a kettle but no water cooler, so there's no water cooler chat. We're all out, relatively speaking.
Right.
Everybody that made money was actually earning money direct was out because we don't do anything internally.
Hmm.
There was no library.
Yeah.
That was the real killer. When I first went to work professionally, I also went to college, and there was an older guy there doing the college course just to get the certification bit of paper so he could get promotion. And he worked for the average size company for my role as in the UK. And that caused a hiccup when we were doing some joint work because the London office had 13 people working in the London office library.
Hmm.
And his company, being the average size company for design consultancy, was 12 people.
Yeah.
And the thing about the remote working, which I've done on and off, particularly once email came around, as opposed to using a fax machine, is, and even with a Zoom, it doesn't really matter whether you've got your trousers on, just the top type thing, right?
Don't stand
But
up.
there's no help in the instantaneous type help of somebody saying, as they have done in one or two instances, I got a post-it on one of my drawings early on saying, can Ian Tubby get in here? And I thought it was a joke. Then later the next week, I met Ian Tubby, who at that point was working for the same company. Turns out he's an ex-submariner.
Hmm.
And he was more round than he was tall. And he probably couldn't get into the point of where the post-it was on the drawing. So I had to change the drawing. But there is that instantaneous, particularly when you're doing design work, and I'm sure in the context of all the other creative elements that go on, even in bookkeeping and murder solutions and using the hammer on a production line for a fall, there's still going to be other creative issues, except particularly in the design world, it's virtually all creative, except when you've got to do your expenses or your timesheet.
Right.
Although they can be creative too. But how do I do this? I know how I did that bit.
Mm-hmm.
And this bit is similar, but not quite the same.
Right.
Is there different regulation?
Right.
Then
Well,
I didn't write.
and that's especially where that sort of walking around and seeing what other people are doing, collegialities.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. One of the other things. Go ahead.
Sorry.
I was gonna change the subject. So complete.
All right. But by the time I got to halfway through my period of working with the people at Bath and then here, the one thing that, amongst other things, was also in the search of excellence was the IBM thing about managing by walking around, which was also a big thing, courtesy of a few other friends who work for Intel. Management by walking around, because you just don't sit in your little cellular office, because you didn't have a cellular office.
Right.
You had a cubicle if you were lucky. It was everything that I've done that has been in the context of highlights of my latter working life have always come from managing by walking around. To go see, realise there's a problem, you might lock yourself away to solve it, but you also might need to talk to other people about, do you find that a problem? And what's your last solution type thing?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it is I've been the $100,000 a year manager, and some of the solutions have come from the $50 a week type guy,
right? Because
he's doing the hammer,
right,
and he knows how long he can do that before his wrist hurts, etc., etc., right?
Yeah.
And
well, and where's it? Yeah, right. And where's the downtime? And where's the
and where to get a better hammer?
Right. Right. Well, and okay, so and that was one of the things that I was curious about, and I got curious about it when I got to, and I think I'm in chapter 2 now as I'm zipping along here. He talks about, when he's talking about Moore's law, and he actually says that somebody did a study, and recent studies have shown, he said, that the number of researchers required today to achieve Moore's law, famous doubling, is more than 18 times larger than the number required in the early 70s. Right. So there's stuff going on, behind the scenes that is facilitating these these things that we see as regularities that that may that are a whole lot more complex than maybe we're
Yeah. And it's
aware of.
really
But we,
like the the entire industry in the world moving towards integrated chips that has helped underlie the growth of all those extra people and those extra researchers. And eventually you're going to get to, and I'll call it a Shannon limit because I think Shannon limits probably are applicable to more areas than just communication across a line.
Hmm.
Eventually, you're going to hit a wall, and Moore's law is going to cease to exist either because something new shows up that supplants it and what's going on, or because they eventually get to a point where it's harder to really get things smaller, or the number of people hiding in the background who are required to be thrown at that problem to make it keep making it cheaper and smaller is more expensive than what you get out of the making it cheaper and smaller.
Hmm.
And we
Yeah.
don't, and very few people, when they talk about Moore's Law, talk about what goes into making Moore's Law a law that actually works.
Hmm. Yeah.
Because you don't see, you see the duck on the water, you don't see how fast its feet are going underneath the water to make it, move.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. I
And
don't know that.
or similarly with the US government, like you don't see what's going on until things start going wrong.
Yeah. Yep. And then, well, or until you start trying to prune things and realize that you can't cut that, connection without a whole cascade of effects, the kind of the whole Doge thing. One of the things that I also found interesting was his other, actually, it was kind of funny. I did a lot of highlighting of captions of graphs this time, which I never typically do, but it seemed like that was where it all kind of came together and it was like, this is the thing that I want to focus on. And figure 10, I think, in the chat, which chapter it is, I'm not sure. It's the one where overlapping learning curves explain disruptive innovation, right? And you've got the shitty, kind of
Yeah.
the shitty instance of the new technology. It underperforms the previous technology. So integrated circuits, underperform analog vacuum tubes, and as a solution for a while. Right. And then ultimately, transistors and then ICs become kind of the thing. And you're right, Chris. I thought a lot of that has to do with the applications to which these things are being put, and there being, kind of a critical mass of apps that support that type of a process in a way that kind of creates that monster demand. But that idea that you start, you kind of start beneath the capability curve of the mature technology is an interesting kind of an interesting way of thinking about that, I thought. Um, and then from there he moved on to Netflix, right, and DVDs, and the idea of mailing DVDs out rather than stocking shelves of things.
Well, even the Netflix is a good example of something big that everybody is aware of.
Mhm.
And now because it's become so huge, and literally it's its own studio now. They're doing their own productions and making things that other studios are not getting a
Mhm.
chance to make because they're competing and doing it themselves. Um, so it's a great example, but it hides a whole bunch of other smaller examples that happen on a daily basis anytime one company potentially considers buying out another.
Mhm.
You don't know what things are going to look like 10 years hence, and you don't know if you're the blockbuster that's dying
Right.
that has the chance for pennies on the dollar to
Right.
acquire some big massive thing.
And you have to wait till whoever is taking over for Michael Porter writes a case study about it 20 years from now.
Or even worse, if Blockbuster had acquired Netflix and spent the money because they had the money to spend to do it, would things have turned out as well, or would they have been so entrenched in the old ways of doing their
Right.
business that they didn't give enough blood flow to this new thing that was going to cannibalize themselves.
Well, absolutely, right. Or even if it wasn't
Quite
designed to be a catch and kill, it could still have worked out that way.
Yeah, or the
quite a lot of quite a lot of acquisition is done to protect the old technology,
Right.
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Such that, and oddly enough, over half of the times I've seen that happen, it's been the nasty people from the fossil fuel industry.
Hmm.
Oddly enough, somebody designs a better burner
Right.
or a whatever it happens to be,
Right. Or
and
200 mpg
they
carburetor.
buy it up
Yeah.
and buy it up in such a way that it stops the final step
Hmm.
of the research, for instance. They buy all the patents because the guy says, why would I turn away 10 million bucks
Right.
and not have all of the pain and suffering of trying to get the company off the ground?
Hmm.
Which is a shame, really. But in the sense of who knows what, the other thing, and particularly about Moore's law type stuff and the integrated chip, um, by the time, oddly enough, by the time Dad was on his downward work cycle, he'd shifted from painted circuits in the early 70s in civilian life to moving on to integrated chips in civilian life.
Hmm.
And oddly enough, the Veritasium video that I've just put into the chat shows how they keep going at the moment.
Mm.
Um, and of course, one of the things Dad worked on was microfilm, which didn't need much of a chip, but eventually did.
Hmm.
And you could get all of Beethoven symphonies on like a 1 inch square piece of film.
Hmm.
And their concern was, when does that process stop? How good can you make a piece of film?
Hmm.
And of course, Intel uses huge frames to put all the detail of each layer of the chip,
Hmm.
and then projects it down onto a small actual chip substrate and starts to grow. And this video shows how that then continued
Hmm.
beyond what was possible with normal light,
Right.
because you're now hitting up against the optical restrictions.
Right. So shifting to X-rays or whatever. Yeah. Yeah,
That's
it's
it.
the thing, the thing that will be interesting, I think, at the tail end of that process will be this thing that he kind of moves on to in the text about forgetting, right? Do we have we do we have an institution? And I thought it was interesting too, because I remember the first Seagate, 5 meg, hard drives, and the ST, what are it, 20s, 120s, and MFM encoding and all of that, but now everything, it's kind of weird because almost everything that I've got is was in this format,
Yeah.
right?
All solid state.
It's all solid state, except now that the price has skyrocketed. Have you noticed lately on these
Yep.
things? It's insane.
Memory is precious at this point.
A 4 terabyte, that I spent, less than $200 on is now close to 500. So I actually got for my next backup, I got a Seagate drive, and it's actually got a drive in there because I heard it last night when it backed up my Mac. And it was, doing the little, and I was like, oh,
When you think about that too, that's one of the issues that there's been a movement towards anti-globalism,
Hmm.
which is, bound up a lot in these, international tariffs. So how can we, you know, create jobs for American workers? It's by closing off foreign markets. So
Right.
we have to do things here in America
Right.
rather than doing it overseas. But the problem is we have a president who thinks that's an easy switch to flip,
Hmm.
and it's gonna happen within 4 years of his presidency
Right.
if I do this thing.
Right.
But really, it's
And not
a
get reversed
you
in year
you
five.
have to read this book. In fact, you really don't have to read this book to know it's the case that it's going to take decades to get the educated workers and the networks and the things here to actually do that stuff. You'll have some small initial pressure to push jobs back,
Yeah.
but you're really not, what you're really doing is you're destroying the rest of the external networks in information and knowledge. And it's interesting if you dig through some of Hidalgo's online economics data, like industries that are building in second and third world countries because of knowledge or resources. There are places in South America where they're they're mining or finding materials and then sending them to Southeast Asia to be turned into something
Hmm.
to then be shipped somewhere else because they don't have the local knowledge to be able to take the raw material and turn it into a thing there and then ship it out from there so that that country can keep the value that was created internally.
Hmm.
And you need the expertise. And it's because of containerization. It's super cheap to ship stuff to foreign countries and back and forth.
Hmm.
We don't even think about it. But those types of values, we we don't we don't know how to measure them to
Hmm.
know that it's a good thing or a bad thing in the long term. It's not until even yesterday that I finally see one of the news articles yesterday afternoon said like 90% of all the tariffs that people are paying are literally being pushed onto the ultimate consumer or to companies that are part of that process.
Hmm.
But so it really amounts to a tax on the American people.
Yeah.
So little wonder the economy, I
Well,
think
it's a consumer tax too, so it's very regressive.
we went from, 4.4% growth, I think, down to 1.4% growth, which economically, like yesterday's news, like covered up
Yeah.
so much of the really bad underlying things that make the next 3 or 4 years are going to be even more miserable
Hmm.
economically. But it's for lack of being able to see where is the value at, who's got it and where and why. Um,
Hmm.
and it's something we should think about on a 40 or a 50-year time scale,
Yeah.
or that China is probably sitting and thinking about, okay, where is all this value and what do we do as a country 50
Hmm.
years or 100 years from now if tariffs like this continue on?
Yeah. Well,
Well, that bit you just mentioned though about the 40 or 50-year thing. I mean, he talked one of the specific things he talked about was, you know, is someplace going to be a center of arts, of a specific thing? Well, find out, did 100 years ago a lot of people move there for that? Then that that sort of that long time zone, you're going to develop expertise because 100 years ago somebody started something there. That's when it becomes the place.
Yes.
hmm
Well,
And
that's why Boston is such a commercial and economic and technological hub in some sense,
yeah.
is 250 years ago, you have Harvard starts and then MIT gets added into the mix. But you also now have, Boston University is a really phenomenally great school and
hmm
good people want to go there now,
Oh, yeah.
not only because it's a good university, but because there's so much happening in Boston.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
then you get other things like,
Right.
hey, the baseball team's okay too, and oh, we kind of have an okay local football team. We
Right.
have
And we
the
got
It's
culture,
only a
we
couple of
have the
hours away
nightlife,
from
we
a
have,
real city like New York.
you know, but it's
but
one
it's
of
got
the
the Brattle
reasons why
Street bookstore too. And yeah,
people love to come to LA because LA has not only
Yes.
yeah,
multiculturalism and all this
right.
other culture and nightlife,
Yep.
the entertainment
Well,
business.
and that
You
goes
know,
all the
it,
way back, right? Because because in his section on Slater, right? So who finances Slater? The Brown brothers, right? And who, and then what the story that I'm more familiar with that he didn't talk about was, then the next theft of the Arkwright, technology and process was by Nathan Appleton and Francis Cabot Lowell going to New Lanark in the, just before the War of 1812 and staring long enough at the equipment that they were able to sort of kind of reverse engineer it and come back and break those there weren't really international patents at the
well,
time, but
to
kind
me
of
that
break
was
through that international intellectual property, thing and build the Boston Associates that built the mills in Waltham on the Charles River and then in Lowell, Lawrence, Nashua,
yeah.
Manchester on the
Well,
Merrimack.
that was one of the more telling things too, is he points out specifically his early failure. He started and for 6 months was building in one place, but he didn't have enough power.
Hmm.
And so it's like, okay, now I've got this knowledge and now I need to go to a place where I can effectuate that knowledge. I need somewhere
Right.
on a river that's
Yeah.
got the water power
Hmm.
and preferably a place that's close to, the people and the other things I'm going to need to create this business.
Right.
And I'm reminded even of, roughly 30 years ago, my dad was going to build the first manufacturing facility for shotguns
Hmm.
for Remington Arms in hundreds of years outside of New York.
Hmm.
And literally, one of their number one concerns was like, how do we get into a distribution network? And, the one thing they also wanted to do was not deal with unions, so let's go to a non-union friendly place
Hmm.
where we'll have workers who can do this stuff. So they go to Kentucky because the primary reason is Kentucky is close to Walmart's
Hmm.
shipping hubs.
Right.
So we can take stuff, truck it, and then immediately Walmart will distribute it everywhere.
Right.
But that is one of the biggest costs. So we'll go to Kentucky, which is fits the union space.
Hmm.
We can find factory workers or a dime a dozen there. So
Right.
it'll cost us next to nothing. But it's what are the big pieces that we need to do
Yep.
to fit into the rest of the system?
Hmm.
And it's proximity to Walmart that is the number one priority because that's going to make things way, way cheaper for us.
Yep.
We're going to save more money than we would by even moving to Mexico and doing it in Mexico and then shipping it back. But those types of things of where do you and your network fit? And it's, stunning to me that he finds it within 6 months. Okay, I need water power to be able to do all this stuff. So let's go look for that. And to me, that's half the genius of what he did was where do I need to be to fit into the rest of the network to do the thing I want to do? So it's easy. Hey, I want to be a screenwriter. Okay, go to Los Angeles because you'll be in that world is a no-brainer. And it's much harder to do that work anywhere else, at least now.
Hmm.
So go be in that milieu,
Yeah.
similar to, hey, and it's tough now if you're a young professor looking for the space, like you just want a job.
Hmm.
You're not thinking, oh, hey, for what I want to do, I need to be in this city. I know local mathematicians in Los Angeles have done incredibly well because regardless of which university you're at, because the aerospace industry is here.
Hmm. Yeah.
Um, you've also got JPL here, but you've got three major universities,
Yeah.
and the amount of kind of interpollination amongst mathematicians at the three big universities in Southern California
Yeah.
is huge
Yeah.
because there's a ton of money being dumped into it. We need people to consult, we need students, we need all these things.
Hmm.
So it's a
Yep.
super smart thing to come here as a young mathematician.
Hmm.
And it's not surprising to me at all that, Abel Prize winners like pop in here as a result of that, or even things like, down in La Jolla, that you can have a place like the Salk Institute pulls in all these people, but it's because you've got all these prize winning faculty,
Hmm.
like, oh, I get to have tea every day.
Right.
The 3 o'clock afternoon tea at a university
Yeah.
is, you stop in, so you don't have to do the work to think, oh, hey, I gotta go to Massachusetts to see the Antiquarian Society and do work there in the library and meet the
Hmm.
people who are there doing the work I'm interested in doing.
Yeah.
It's more fun when it's done for you automatically, and it happens every day at
Yeah.
3 o'clock. You just have
Oh,
to walk
absolutely.
50 feet from your office to go participate.
Hmm.
You know,
There are benefits to that. Yeah. Yeah.
and the value of that is
You know,
immense. So it's
you know, yep. Go, that
so
is
I
that is a
so
thing. That is a thing that will need to be, in kind of the new world order, will need to be replaced.
so
But
here's a question though, Dan, is you went from Bemidji in one small space with colleagues you see regularly, and now you're teaching at three different places.
mhm.
Would you say, from a network perspective, do you get enough interaction from those participating in those three different areas to replace the
Not
interaction you had at the one?
not organically. I have to actually work at it. And it's much more up to me to kind of keep that network going and to keep I think that for people knowing that I'm at a number of places sort of benefits me, but not in that way, not in the way, not in the way that of, okay, this is what seeing somebody and saying, oh, what are you doing? Oh, I'm having the students read this today and we're going to discuss it this way. And, that kind of thing doesn't happen as organically. So I have to find other ways of letting
Yeah,
folks know
that
that
was
that sort of thing is happening. But from that perspective, it's sort of, what you've brought us to, Chris, is this kind of sort of monkeys on the trees analogy that he deals with in this kind of
which
towards
is a
the end
weird
of the book.
analogy, actually. I was
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
but how do you come up with a better one?
yeah,
Although it's obviously this analogy has been stuck in his head for 15 plus years at least,
yeah.
20 years.
Yeah, and I liked his, and I loved his stories of the banned, fighter plane, manufacturers going to make Vespas. I thought that was,
Well,
I
I
know where, and
remind me too,
I knew where he was going with it. I'm like, oh God, I love this.
the day before I started reading this, I watched the movie Finding Forrester. It's one of those movies I watch about once a year, and as I'm reading this section, I'm like, oh, like there. I remember the story of, the kid who he's playing basketball, and the guy shows up with his BMW, and he goes over to look at it, and the guy's scared he's gonna like do something to his car,
Hmm.
and then there's the interaction with, oh, because you're such an aficionado of BMW, you know that this, white and blue logo on the front is actually an airplane propeller. And because they were German and they were really great at making airplanes, after the war, when they couldn't make airplanes, what do? Well, you take all your expertise and you go start manufacturing automobiles,
Yeah, yeah.
you know.
Well, and there
So,
are,
and I was
yeah,
shocked he didn't use that as one of his stories, but it was
right,
fun to hear the
It was a
Vespa
different,
story
right,
instead.
or the Saab made from jets,
Yeah,
but it was a different war too. He liked sticking with the World War II stuff, and BMW is, of course, World War One.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, and Saab went back to making jets. So I guess are
yeah.
they making Saabs again?
I don't think they ever stopped.
Oh yeah, no,
Yeah, I
I think
don't.
they were,
Yeah.
yeah, but they stopped making cars. But I think maybe they're making cars again because I've seen
Yeah.
some Saabs running around that maybe they're just using the nameplate again.
I
Well,
do have a quick question. A quick question though, and I think particularly for the teachers here, do you feel like you are? I mean, so again, the other part of the in-person versus remote, as a again, yeah, I'm not an educator, but I've certainly been a mentor. And do you find, again, that I was very effective? I felt much more effective as a mentor in person
Hmm.
than, and I'm curious, from sort of the pedagogy perspective, do you feel like you're losing much from that, from that lack of proximity
Um,
in terms of,
yeah,
effectiveness? Yeah,
yes. I mean, well, and ever since COVID, right? We've been sort
yeah,
of,
that's what I mean. Yeah.
trying to create workarounds for in-person discussion, right? And so I do feel better about that now, because I've really been kind of leaning heavily on, things like hypothesis, where students have to actually kind of engage with each other and with the text and stuff. But I think it can, yeah, I think it's doable, but it's not as obvious. I mean, because it's easy to sort of, I mean, everybody knows how to have a conversation, which maybe isn't even true, right? But it seems less difficult um, to envision that in a in that kind of scenario. Whereas you do have to kind of work harder at it, and it is an artificial um, is a more artificial thing. And I think the students recognize that it is. But I think that once they get to doing it, at first it's kind of like pulling teeth, and then afterwards it's like, oh yeah, we're actually having a conversation here.
Well, the other thing you're doing too for the long term, presuming a hypothesis stays there, they keep using it as a tool,
Hmm.
it can become part of their informal network
Yeah.
that they're not only interacting first in a small space in a class to figure out how it works,
Hmm.
but do you find other people in doing that and slowly become more public?
Yeah.
And I found lots of interesting people whose
Hmm.
are in totally different areas
Right.
than what I really care about directly,
Hmm.
but I can dip my toe into their annotations to see what's going on in other topics.
Yeah.
In some sense, they're indexing and doing really great work for free for me.
Yeah. Hmm. Yeah.
You
Well,
know,
it's kind of, yes, and I don't have them. I don't have students do that. I don't tell them, okay, now we're going to go out and do a public. I keep them in the private group because I don't want to be responsible for them putting anything out in public that will ever come back and bite them. But I do kind of every once in a while show them how I use it, and so one of the things I do is I show them yours. And I say, this guy is so prolific. I just follow him around, and
well,
yeah, but
and when you know what or you can look at my main page and see here are the 10 topics
mhm.
that have the most annotations,
All right,
and then you can click into them and see how those things branch out.
yep,
You know,
yep,
if you look, I told somebody the other day, my kind of secret. They're like, "Oh, how do you know so much about typewriters?" And it's like, well, I've been reading about them for a couple of years, and as I read and I annotate, like for me to find something, you can query my database, and here's the link, go to typewriters, but then you'll
mhm,
see all the subheadings
yep,
and how many tags there are on each of them.
yep,
But then if you have a specific problem on your 1958, Royal Quiet Deluxe, you can click on those tags and see all the things related to that particular typewriter
hmm,
that I've run across, and very likely it's going to fix your problem or help you figure out what the words are to describe your problem, and then you can then use those words to kind of query that database to figure out exactly how to fix it.
hmm,
But very few
Well,
people know how to do that. They can't even, they can't go to, there's a bunch of Facebook groups and Reddit groups and even YouTube, and if you search any one of those three things, you may need to know the right words for what the thing is that's broken on your machine. But once you
Right.
know what that word is, you can search it, you'll find the answer.
Yeah.
But almost nobody goes to find the answer. They're just lazy and, hey, I'll go to this big group and ask one question
Right.
and hope for it and hope that somebody sees and knows the answer.
Right. And isn't so annoyed with having to answer the same question 1,000 times.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think this is a classic for going back to something that Chris has repeatedly said, as in you go to the social media places and talk about, oh, how do you do a Zettelkasten? How do you use Obsidian? Because not just because you're lazy, but because you don't necessarily know the words, etc. But also the converse happens. You put a genuine question into those spaces, as in, I've got a BMW that the passenger door window keeps sticking, and I have to pull the glass up by hand, as a for instance. And it's a nine. It's a 2200 Series 7 engine size science. And half plus of the answers you get are effectively telling you, well, I wouldn't start there. I would have had a Toyota type thing, right? And it's the effort to sort through the garbage that comes back is probably not always worth it. And it's and or the other thing is that there are people that know about BMWs and all the rest of it, but it's like they will then say, which BMW was that? And it's not like they didn't hear me. They've got the question in text just above where they're typing. I've told them the year, the model number, the engine size, and it's the front passenger window, and it's all the back windows don't work like that type problem. And it's at that point, do you if it's social media type thing and they have a block function, is that the time that you go around and block all these people? Because next time they might actually have the answer and actually realize they have the answer and answer the question properly, as opposed to
It all comes down to, you believe people can change, Tim.
you.
Well, the other issue too, though, is what are they hoping to get as a result? Are they really going to spend the 100 hours taking their door apart to fix that window because you gave them a piece of the knowledge to do it, when they may be missing the knowledge of how do I take the door apart? How do I use a hammer? How do I use a screwdriver? Or is it way easier just to call a mechanic, take it in for, a few hours. They'll fix it for me for $200 and I'll be done with it. And I can use my free time, the hundreds of hours that I would try, and I see it in the typewriter space all the time. People with no mechanical knowledge whatsoever and no mechanical facility, like, oh, I've got this typewriter for $20. How do I clean it and fix it? It's gonna take you 6 months and all of your free time to learn all the stuff, to do it and fix it. It's gonna take you a couple weeks and a few $100s to give a repair tech who can do it in 6 hours.
Right.
But you'll have had the joy of learning it. But
that's the thing. That's my first question usually is to people is, is your hobby the typewriter collecting, typewriter repair, or typewriter use? And if you're a professional writer and you want to use it to write, just go spend $500 or $600.
Yep.
Buy one from a shop that's been cleaned and repaired and guaranteed to work.
That's exactly so.
Don't waste 4 years of your life collecting 20 typewriters and and
And it,
6 years of trying to tinker and repair when what you really want to do is write. Like
Mhm.
you're wasting hundreds of that. You'll blow, you know, 10 grand of your time and
but,
effort and money to
Mhm.
find the great typewriter when you could just buy it for 500 on day one. Like,
Yep.
I used to work on old cars and motorcycles, and I actually enjoyed that more than the driving.
Mm.
oh yeah,
Yeah,
there's
I mean, yeah,
Yeah.
I had BMW. I had two different BMW motorcycles, and they were kind of a pig to ride. But man, taking those things apart and putting them back together, that was
Mhm.
fun.
I
Mhm. Yep.
I'll dig it up in a minute, but there's a guy who broke down hobbyist work into four quadrants, and it's either you like collecting the stuff, you like talking about the stuff, you like working on the stuff, or you like actually using and doing the thing with the kit. And which of those
well,
areas do you fit into? And in a broad sense, when it comes to typewriters, I'm a four quadrant person.
Yeah.
I can do all four. But
Mhm.
for you on, automobile stuff, you like the repairing and
Well, I'm
not the
driving
driving.
fast too, but I long term I spent much more time fixing them and
Mhm.
wasn't interested in having somebody else do the work because it was more fun.
Yeah.
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 Or do you even like talking about it with other people?
That
How
too.
did, and
Mhm.
that's a whole other piece of the
well,
puzzle
but
altogether.
Well, and
way,
oftentimes that's, I mean, it's kind of funny. I just, in my spare time, I guess, I spent a little bit of time in the last couple of weeks in the evenings watching the Taylor Sheridan shows, all those cowboy shows. I actually began with I went in chronological order. I began with 1888 and then 1923 and then Yellowstone. And just sort of that kind of, and I watched Yellowstone last, and that's the one that Taylor Sheridan is in a lot, riding, doing that um, very particular style of riding, right? And I don't know if he can really do it or if it's just they were just cutting it to an extent that it made it look like he could do it. But he wants the world to think that he can do it. And, and it's such a kind of a very particular thing, but it's associated with this whole um, lifestyle, right? It's kind of an identity issue. So yeah. So it was very strange to me that way, right? That it was this thing. And then there were some other things that interested me about, just sort of the overall general kind of mean spiritedness of his whole worldview. But in any case, so we get to this point at the very end of this section. I think we were just supposed to read the first two sections, right? And he sort of ends on, to me, it's sort of a cliffhanger, right? Because he says knowledge diffusion is governed by two complementary principles: diffusion across geographies and social networks, and diffusion across activities or cognitive domains, right? And so I was like, okay, say more. Right? And so,
Ever the
there
professor.
was an element,
yeah.
there was an element of these chapter one of the intro wherever he put these three principles up
Yeah. Mhm.
that were um, principles of time, as in, like with the Wright brothers, we've got a plane,
Mhm.
but the French never acknowledged that because they put the first person up that could actually control the flight, as in go round a corner.
Mhm.
Um, and most of what happened with the Wright brothers after was trying to defend their patents
Yeah.
on what they had.
Right.
So you've got that increasing piece of time,
Mhm.
and you get better and better and better collectively. There's that principles of space that you just mentioned about with the geography. And yeah, obviously there's still no avionics industry coming out of Zululand type thing. But there's a there's the element of how much market is there, how much demand is there for
Mhm.
something, and whoever's first to the market or competitive to market dominates, not necessarily in a monopoly, duopoly, or triopoly, but the group dominates.
Mhm.
But I got the principle of value. I'm thinking now of me as marketing. My original professional skill was I could calculate systems and draw systems.
Mhm.
I haven't for what must be, if I sat there and watched it out, probably 2/3 of my career, I've never done a drawing because AutoCAD, etc., came along and just crashed my skill of being able to lay out a drawing correctly, use a pen and pencil correctly. But AutoCAD now does an awful lot of calculation
Mhm.
that I did in my second phase of my industrial work.
Mhm.
So I've moved, so I haven't done a calculation outside of a rule of thumb. And that to me is the same as me doing a freehand sketch. Say, make me one of these, or draw me one of these, but do it with AutoCAD or whatever equivalent.
Mhm.
So the retrospective old skills, the fundamental.
Well,
Can you do a perspective drawing on paper
right.
with a pencil?
Right.
Because pencil and paper is always available. Nobody really wants to carry a laptop around
Well,
or even a tablet around to do totally a sketch. If you've got those skills,
right. Or even
it
if you're
doesn't work so well.
even if you're prompt engineering, can you recognize one that's done wrong? Right.
Yeah.
Can you recognize a calculation that was, that was done incorrectly, right? It's gonna cause problems down the line.
And that's when I started on the professional calculator. They said, we're not going to let you use the computer. So I go, why ever not? Because you need to get a feel
Mhm.
and know how to put all the numbers together.
Yeah.
And I was fine with that because, oddly enough, the next big step was I was writing the software,
Mhm.
or at least a little bit, but was missing
Right.
things like, let's have a ventilated window.
Like the functional.
We've got a normal
Yeah.
glass window.
Yeah.
It's already in the system.
Mhm.
But if I'm now going to capture the heat as though the window's a solar collector to either take away heat or
Mhm.
put heat in the building,
Mhm.
common in the UK, right?
Yeah.
Then you need to know other things. So, I
Yeah.
progressed in that context.
Mhm.
But the way then goes on elsewhere in the book, outside of just describing the principles, that coming over as the elements even of trust deregulation of environmental standards, the cities are now trying to put them back on their own, or the counties or the states.
Mhm.
And it's like the big one that I think that's come through recently in the UK is everybody was up in arms when our congestion charge, where you have to pay a toll to drive, got bigger and bigger and bigger in London.
Mhm.
And it's now well past the break-even point of London's health service. Forget about anything else. Now has saved more money than has actually been paid by Londoners to drive through,
Mhm.
simply because the amount of particulates in the air are lower.
Mhm. Yeah.
And oddly, because here is so bad, we don't have a decent wind structure. We don't get a decent tide as well. So we don't shift air very well here. Yesterday, my air quality was at 60 on, which is still, it's at amber.
Yeah.
Get it down below 50 or 40 or something, and it goes green. Yet London, with all the traffic and there are more people in and out of London and working in London there is in the entire country here.
Mm-hmm.
Yet London has typically 20, 30, maybe 40 on a bad day. Here, my bad days are 150.
Wow.
And I can't see the 10th tower block away,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Wow.
You know what you need, Tim? You need the London Eye, but put some fan blades on it so it's actually moving air.
Yeah.
We have one.
So you
We
get the
have one.
tourist, you get the tourist
That's bigger.
destination and the better air quality
Perfect,
all
yeah.
at the same time.
It's out on a new man-made island just across just 200 meters out into the Gulf,
Mm.
right? And its diameter from memory is bigger than the London one.
Wow.
It's
So
not going round very fast. I think we should speed it up.
yeah.
Yeah, and put bigger blades on it to get more air movement. Which
Yeah.
you if anybody knows about air movement in a space, it's you, right?
Yeah. Yeah. There you go. So do we think that he did enough, or are we, maybe we actually should have, I suppose, if this, this section was the second law, I suppose the third section will be the third law, and then the final section will be all of the applied stuff. Is that the way it's going to work out, Eric, from your reading ahead? Maybe we should.
Yes, the third law shows up in the third section.
Okay, so
but I haven't gotten. But I think that's where I stopped. It's like
okay, all right, so you
point for the
haven't
third
got
law, and it's like, okay,
now we put it all together, and something really amazing happens.
we'll see.
Yeah. Okay,
I'm not that far ahead.
So I guess my question for the end of this, this when he's, sort of in like half a page, sort of recapitulating the second law before he moves on to part 3, and he says this, these complementary principles, diffusion across geography, and then this, this activities in cognitive domains, the jet fighter people making, or the propeller fighter people making Vespas. Did he do enough with that? I mean, I mean, I think that the anecdotes that he's coming up with are excellent, and and have a lot of good information just from the perspective of, again, I'm going to use some of his stuff about Slater before I talk, next time I do, certainly next time I teach environmental history, before I talk about the Lowell mills. But was it enough? I mean, did he kind of prove his points?
Well, I don't know about proof. I mean, I don't think we also haven't explored. We haven't really come close to exploring everything he said in the 2 sections we've got. I mean, one of the things that I was really interested in was the forgetting part.
Yeah.
And the initial anecdote with Elvis stuff going to hell is different, but I was very interested in sort of I found the whole anecdote around Polaroid.
Yeah.
About the resurgent, the Impossible Company, I think is what it's called, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And how they trying to reconstruct Polaroid, the making Polaroid film was such a incredible ordeal. Only a couple of years, from after it had actually, stopped happening, and it took them like 15, 20 years almost to get back to the point where they could do decent film. From when they actually just, from when the plant that was still working got handed over to them, because there was so much infrastructure there. And you even think of, I mean, I don't know, again, I don't remember if it was apocryphal or not, but I do remember there was this bad George C. Scott film from the 80s called The Formula. And it was related to a similar book or whatever, where somebody somehow or other had, left over from the Nazis in World War II. The Nazis somehow or other were able to make gasoline out of coal, but nobody knew how to do it anymore, right? Yeah, that was the whole thing. And there was this, this is like, early 80s, late 70s, early 80s, when, oh my God, we can make gasoline out of coal. It would save the world, right? And this idea of the lost knowledge of how the Romans made concrete, the lost knowledge of what was Greek fire, or this kind of stuff. That stuff.
It's still lost.
Yeah, well, I mean,
No,
it's getting
I've seen
closer
some
on.
recent. There's some recent journal articles about people actually have figured out what the formula was for the Roman concrete.
Yes.
I think that's now a solved problem.
Mhm.
Yeah. Though, I mean,
But making
you
it
won't
at
know until it's a
scale, a
thousand
whole
years
other
old and
issue.
underwater for a while and it gets stronger. But
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, again, I think Tim's gonna
Or
know better than any of us
or
what.
even what happens when you don't have an ongoing concern that as a business that can encapsulate the knowledge and continue it on, which
Mhm.
is what happens with Polaroid. But even worse, what happens when you're the US government and you have NASA and all these people and you figure out how to send people to the moon? If we wanted to send people to the moon now, today, we decided today we're going to do it, we could probably do it faster than 10 years, but we're literally going to have to start over entirely from scratch
Mhm.
to resolve that engineering problem. And the cost and the time to do it are going to be massively more than the cost of the first time.
Yep. And we don't have
But it's
Stanley Kubrick.
because we didn't, there was no ongoing concern that maintained the knowledge of how to do that.
Yep.
Because after we went to the moon, we didn't create the goalpost of, oh, now let's go to Mars. And had they done that, it would be a whole lot easier and cheaper to do. But all those people have moved on or died or gone. And even though we have the records,
Mhm.
we need to spend the time and effort and energy to read the records. And is that better or worse than just rebuilding it from the ground up? It's that kind of lost knowledge, which is where some of that forgetting piece
Yeah,
is was interesting to me.
Mhm.
Is
Yeah.
how to, how do you do these things? Or even, or the forgetting as, we could tie it back to the typewriter space again. Like it used to be everyday knowledge how to use a typewriter. How do the most common stupid question on all the Reddit fora is, how do I type an exclamation point?
Mhm.
You know, that it's a period, backspace, and then apostrophe. Like, it's
yeah,
that's
that's a
simple.
pretty old
But
typewriter. Every
but
typewriter I ever owned had an exclamation
well,
point.
it wasn't really until the 70s that they all had a number one and an exclamation point key.
Mhm.
And before
Mhm.
that, you knew you had to type a lowercase l to get your one because we're saving
By
the
saving a
steel.
key. Yeah. Yep. Saving a
We're
lot.
saving the steel and the key to do this.
Yep.
But for almost 80, 90 years, like everybody knew lowercase l, that gives you the one.
I remember that.
Now, just people are like, oh, how do I do? In fact, somebody the other day was like, oh, I have a keyboard with a one and an exclamation point key, but the slug on that key lever is gone. Like, and now they're worried, like, should I buy this machine or not buy this machine or keep it or give it away? And I'm like, that's a solved problem. Period, backspace. You have those glyphs on your keyboard
Mhm.
if and when you need to use them. And the guy was like, "Oh, well, totally. I'm going to keep this machine now." And I'm like,
Or
that's is the simplest, lowest level base knowledge versus, I people every day are like, "Oh, does anybody have a repair manual for this thing?"
Mhm.
Honestly, most of the basics are just if you have mechanical knowledge and you look at the machine, I almost guarantee you could figure it out and fix it without a repair manual. And the repair manuals are good for some things, but really the amount of low touch stuff that's just totally gone in that space. And the manuals and the things are out there, they're on the internet. You can find them if you dig around for a minute, but it's the hows and whys and the light touch stuff that's just all gone that makes it that much harder.
Yeah.
Um,
Another example I wanted to quickly bring up of the lost things. I mean, I visited Athens for the first time a couple of years ago, and they've got that crazy. It's the machine they found with all the
the
gears and
Antikythera
yes,
device.
and they're still trying. It's all there. Well, it's a large part of it's there, and sort of working out what it does and how does it actually work and all that stuff. And that's 2000. That's 2,500 years old.
That also
Well, you
is,
go
there's been enough
go
archaeology on it. That's a solved problem now too, and they've figured out the
Okay,
gearing. and it
That's not
matches.
what they said at the museum. What they got
Well,
where they
at the
got it from.
museum, they're still trying to create some mystery around it, but
Yeah.
archaeologically, it was a star
Well,
finding,
Yeah.
But it was
universe calculating device.
but the research on that has
you
continued
take
until the last 12 months, Chris. I
Yeah.
mean,
Oh no, there's
you-
still
you-
there's still
they got to
research to be
I mean, in
done.
Greece, they got to reprint those plaques on the display. I've been to the same display as Will.
Yeah.
It's a very fancy display.
Yes,
To
it is.
redo it
Got
will take some work.
Yeah. But there's
so
there's stuff out there.
taking that example,
And
taking
people
that example,
go there looking for
instance, and roll back to something that Chris mentioned about, oh, it's easy to look at, and all the manuals are there. I'm going to go back to my earlier comment about the window glass that won't come up in the BMW type thing.
Mhm.
Oh, maybe 10% of what I've done in terms of the numbers of jobs is people say their building doesn't work. And very often it's often the air conditioning. And they've had all sorts of people go along and say, oh, you need to buy this, or this needs to be done, or whatever. And it clearly doesn't always solve the problem. Half of the time, it's because the main air plant is not working. And it's not working, so much not working, that the belt that is between the motor and the fan is on the floor broken. And it's like, go to the nearest grill, put your hand up. Can you feel the air? If not, guess what? Go fucking look at the fan, right? There was the funniest one though, I think, was somebody eventually gone through all of their maintenance people, their occasional consultant, and that's it. The heating doesn't work in their offices. And they've got these long radiator convectors that are the size of a window. And this bit here is hot, and none of this is hot everywhere. Okay, so it's a problem. Is it? I get a call. It's my shortest, fastest job ever. Right? I look through the grill, and there's a heater like this long on a 6 foot wide package. So of course it's hot above the heater, and there's no heat over there. So there's no air moving either because there's no convection. And it's like, okay, I'll explain this to somebody in the office and charge them a couple of £100. It's just, how could the wheels have fallen off your truck? Why did you think you'd be able to drive?
Well, but that's part of the issue, though, is even some of the small touch bits of knowledge to know what the hell you're looking at, to be able to fix it. Even that's gone in a lot of cases. So, or just doesn't exist. You and I were engineers. It's easy for us, but you give it to Dan, and Dan may have to puzzle it for a while before he. I don't know what his mechanical expertise is to be able to do that, but it's
not as much as it used to be.
But the small farm would call for it.
I mean, every day of the week, my wife is astounded at the number of things in the house that will break and I can fix in 20 minutes. And she's like, this is totally the reason I married you, because I could not do that. And I would have gone out and hired, some technician at $100 an hour to fix whatever that thing was.
Mine mostly nowadays is limited to making my parents' computers work.
Yeah, but even I will sit and think, okay,
that's the Geek Squad.
How much time is this going to take me? And if I can't do it in, a percentage of the time it would take a plumber and an electrician, I know it's a lot easier and cheaper just to hire the plumber or the electrician to do the thing.
Well, I must admit, I'm ruining the day I'm sure he's going to come. It's when I've got to ask one of my kids, or worse, one of my grandchildren, how do I do X on the computer?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
I'm sure it will come.
Yep. Yep.
And they're going to be, Grandpa, what are you using a computer for? We could do this on my phone with a little app in seconds.
Right. And watch it on the glasses. Yeah. Do we really want to Do we really want to read Nexus? I was just kind of scrolling through it does have a lot of votes.
I was just scrolling for votes. I don't have a particular horse in that.
I guess I didn't read Homo Deus, so it was the previous one that I read, I guess.
I'm open to most of the things that I voted on, so I don't.
Yeah. I'd be okay with that one. I will not be able to meet next week because I will be in Woodland, and I think Saturday is the day of the actual party. So,
Oh, yeah. Well, we could push a week.
so we'll have to
That'll
fit.
give me more time to tinker around with some of the things that are in this.
Okay.
And the physical book to actually show up.
Yeah,
It's
probably
nothing
will.
worse than the book finally
Or
shows up.
trying to
after the
engineer
reading.
some problems.
Yes. All right. Yeah, and I'm looking forward to I'm looking forward to the complicated stuff that you.
But it is interesting in a book about knowledge and knowledge transfer and diffusion that it's taken so long for this book that was published in Britain to come out in the US, and even once it's supposedly out in the US, it still isn't actually here.
Yeah.
And I'll have read the book before the physical copy finally shows up, which,
Yeah. Which
kills
is
me.
Yep. And probably
But just to prove the point.
it probably says something about Penguin's expectations of sales.
Although
His
reading it,
first book from Basic sold incredibly well for the topic that it was.
This feels like an airport business pickup book in some ways.
Yeah.
Like, not quite that simplified or mass, but it is one that you would see. I mean, it's in the Clayton Christensen, Jeffrey Moore kind of space.
But what's interesting is that's totally not the audience he's trying to reach with this book.
Right.
He's trying to reach economists in some sense, in a broad sense.
Right.
But and what'll happen is it'll be out for a year and then it'll hit the business space and it will become a bestseller because it's in that business space, and they'll remarket or rebrand it, which
I was quite impressed that it led me back to Rita Warworth and the donut economics.
Yeah.
Has he been on the circuit? Has he been?
But it hasn't.
Has he been on
But
any?
it hasn't
podcasts?
led.
I haven't looked yet.
It hasn't led me back to Malcolm Gladwell and the
he does have a TED Talk.
The ability of aircraft to fly back to their home base in World War II, and the statisticians for that. But
it looks like he has one. He has one from a month ago about the Polaroid camera. Then he's got a Secret Paths of Knowledge transfer from about a month ago. That's about an hour long. And
I did see a YouTube video for a group that's got 250,000 subscribers. But what's interesting, even more so, is how easy or hard is it to sell this book given the platform of where he's at? So, for reasons to me beyond passing understanding, he was an associate professor at MIT and was not given tenure. And he left, and he's now, I think, at Toulouse in France.
Yeah.
So he's not in the intellectual hub of the universe anymore. He's off doing his research in Europe at a smaller university.
Right.
But still working at an incredibly high level because he's got a network of people to be able to do that. But because he doesn't have the platform MIT or the MIT Media Lab, it's a lot harder for him now to break through from a network perspective than it was 10 years ago when he was at MIT in the media lab.
Right.
Um,
Right. Although
but
his,
I have to imagine his family and personal life is immensely better in Toulouse, France than it is in Boston for a guy who grew up in Argentina.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
but I just have the extra context of knowing, where he started out at Notre Dame and followed through thereafter.
hmm
Um, but I think it also impacts the fact that it's a British publisher and not a US publisher.
hmm
Although I gotta wonder why Basic Books didn't drag him down, because I think that was a pretty reasonable seller for
yeah,
them not to have kept up with him and kept publishing his other stuff.
right. Maybe he switched agents when he moved to Europe. Yeah, yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. It does look like he's got 13,000 views on this thing from the machine learning Street Talk channel, why scientists can't rebuild a Polaroid camera. Then he's got about almost 8,000 views on the secret paths of global knowledge transfer that was put out there by the Royal Institution. So both within the last month. So maybe he'll take off.
Oh, they're gonna love it. It'll be a new excuse, like, hey, we need more H-1B visas. That's
Perfect.
That YouTube video actually is a pretty good re-encapsulation of the whole book inside of the hour of that interview.
Okay.
So essentially, through the interview, he kind of repitches the entirety of the book.
Hmm.
So for those who are watching this and don't want to read the whole thing, that's
I'll probably listen to it as I
or it's a good review after you've read the
Yeah.
book before,
Let's just see if
before
he
we
see what else he has to say.
come back 2 weeks from now.
Yep. Okay. Cool. Well then, yeah, we finish it. We skip next week. We finish it the following week, and then we move on to Harari, I guess.
I mean, if people are game for that, or do we want something back to history or social structures or whatnot?
I don't know. I think it'll probably be history adjacent. It looks like so.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I feel like I threw it out there and it got grabbed, and I want to make sure that it's not.
Yeah, no, it had a lot of votes. So, maybe we'll.
Is that one of the ones that F voted on?
Yeah, I think so. Let me go back to there.
Because if they were to come back, it might be interesting.
Let's see.
I've only read Sapiens. I love Sapiens, so
All right, that's a thought.
I
think I read half of Sapiens and lost interest, which seems weird.
It got better for me at the later parts of Sapiens were better for me than the earlier part. When he starts talking about sort of the history of modern economics since roughly the 13th century to the present.
So you're saying I gave up too quickly?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I think the latter part of it was much better.
I might have done the same. Yeah, because I don't remember it being super high on my.
It's mostly about economics.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or the parts that come away from me were mostly about economics.
Yeah. Well, this will be interesting if it's very it's actually information.
All right.
All right. Cool. Well, thank you. Have a good rest of your day.
2 weeks then.
2 weeks.
A fortnight.
Yep, a fortnight.